Hello, everyone. Welcome to eLearnChat, where you always learn something new. I am Rick Zanotti, and I am joined today by Harold Muliati. He's our video producer, but today he's also co-hosting. Leslie Price can't make it here. We still haven't had the time change over in England, and she is taking care of her grandson at this moment. Anyway, she will be on probably back in April. Right now, we're getting everything back so she can come on at least part-time. And we've got a great guest today. We've got Robert Craigo back for his second visit. Now, I said this on the first show, and I'll say it again. I love his name. Craigo reminds me of that detective guy, Bookham Craigo. I love that name. It's just a good name. Anyway, he's back on. He's going to be talking about the e-learning market, and we're going to ask him a little bit more about some of the food service industry background he's got, because that is real mission critical training need. And that's he's got some great real world experience in that area. So here we go.
This show is sponsored by Relate Corporation. Visit us at www.relatecasts.net. Thanks.
And we are back, and in that center position of power, we've got Robert Craigo. How are you, Robert?
I'm good, thanks, Rick. And Harold?
I'm good, too.
Yeah, and it's an interesting industry. We were talking a little bit pre-show about the potential numbers for growth in this industry. And what's your research been on this?
Well, Rick, I had one thing that I read just a minute ago, and I was thinking, holy cow, I'm not sure I can really believe all of this, but it's quite large, even if this is off by 25%. It says that in 2019, the global online e-learning market was sized at approximately $101 billion. That's pretty phenomenal.
Of course, that is global, so maybe globally that makes sense.
Yeah. The LMS segment was roughly $18 billion.
Wow. And
by 2026, they're saying the global market for e-learning and online learning, et cetera, is supposed to be around $370 billion.
$370 billion. That's incredible.
That is incredible.
And that's only 5 years from now?
Yeah. But let's say that's off by some factor. Like I say, even 25 or even 50%. That's pretty amazing. Because it is growing really rapidly. I wanted to take you back when I first started getting into e-learning and that whole segment. I guess at the time we called it computer-based training. Mm-hmm. But I started looking at it in 1998.
Yeah.
And by 1999, we were starting to build some small programs because the cost was astronomical. And by 2000, it was starting to come down a little bit, but they still didn't have these authoring systems yet. By 2021, it was starting to come down even more. And that's when I really got started into designing e-learning programs based on existing content. And I guess by 2023, it had gotten relatively easy where we could almost do it all in-house, of course, using some licensed programs and things like that. And by 2010, I may have given you a wrong date a minute ago, but it was 2003. And then by 2010, we were up and running, and we could produce a program or a quick rollout of a new product within a week. Yeah. And that's, editing and changing things, et cetera. So it's phenomenal. But the other part of the research that I was able to come up with was the business segment, our business segment of e-learning is one of the more rapidly growing areas and will continue to grow, they say, at an annual growth rate of somewhere between 7 and 10% for the next 3 to 5 years. And that means that there's going to be a lot of people getting into the business of, or the task of creating e-learning for their organizations. And there's a number of things, of course, that you have to do in order to be able to do that. If you're starting from scratch like we did, it was a pretty big experience, and it was a long learning curve. But I guess, and there's about 5 things that they recommend that you do. Of course, you start with a needs analysis, etc. But even before that, I think the biggest thing that has to be in place is corporate acceptance of this initiative. And it has to be from the top down, because if you don't have support for it, it won't work. And that was one of the biggest things that I found that was a huge benefit, is our CEO was really the one who gave the order to get it done. And once he said to do this, reported it over the years, then everybody else fell in line. And the organization had to make that a major priority, because it was a huge investment, especially for a small-ish company. A large company like McDonald's, maybe not quite as expensive or unaffordable, but smaller companies that might be 100 to even 400 or 500 restaurants or units. It could be C-stores or convenience stores, anything that's a chain type of an operation. They have to plan for that kind of thing.
Right.
So it's if you don't have that corporate buy-in, you're pretty much dead in the water. No matter how easy you think it may be or accepted it could be, unless the company is going to support it and back it with their budget, etc. It's a futile effort until you get that piece in place.
It's interesting, because the food service industry is one of the preeminent developers of training, because they have to. They hire a lot of people, a lot of young people, many times high school students and other, probably early college students. And so they've got no real experience many times when they first start out. These are their first jobs, and they have to learn how to work, and they have to learn quickly. Now, interestingly enough, one of the problems that e-learning has had in a lot of the big organizations, at least in the past, I'm going back in past now, and to a point, some of it still exists today. A lot of the small, like let's say Jack in the Box, McDonald's, Taco Bell, they don't really have a lot of computers inside for people to take, web-based training or any kind of training. So there's a lot of hands-on training. There is some computerized training. I know they're moving to that area. Back then, I think you mentioned that you were a training manager for a large area. I think you were doing all of California at one point. In those days, you had to travel a lot, correct? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I had all of Texas, Oklahoma. I had St. Louis and Colorado in there. So it was the largest region in the company. At that time, it was with Jack in the Box, which was owned by Foodmaker, who owned Ralston Purina owned Foodmaker at that time.
Oh, interesting.
Yes, yeah. We used a lot of Super 8 film and that kind of thing, and even the slide tape machines and all of that. Yep. But that was back in the 80s. Yeah. And but now Jack in the Box has since they've gotten very aggressive, and they were able to. I'm almost positive, it's been quite a while since I've spoken with anybody there, but they do have some computers in their stores and all that can handle that kind of thing. But what we did at the Crystal Company, where I was I retired from there in 2013, but back in 2000. That was a big deal, because at first we thought that the back office system would be able to accommodate the e-learning initiative. But that was a mistake. They can't, because they're running all their sales reports, they're doing their scheduling and inventory on those systems. And they will stop that in order to allow students or employees to get on there for any period of time. Just wouldn't work. So at the time, I believe we had roughly over 400 restaurants. So we had to purchase laptops at that time for all 400 of those stores, plus an inventory, so that in case one of them went down and had to be replaced, we could replace it quickly. But at that time, it was you didn't have web-based training. You had computer-based, which meant that if you had CDs, you'd have to take a CD or mail a CD to all of these different stores. But if you changed anything significant on that system, somebody had to be out there to load it. Mm-hmm. So we used to call it SneakerNet. And we had trainers that would run around all through the system, taking a new CD to the store and loading it onto their e-learning system so that they could take their training. But yeah, once we got into web-based, it made it somewhat easier. except that the connectivity was an issue.
Mm-hmm.
In some of these locations, they're pretty remote, and they just don't have access, or didn't at the time. It's getting better, but you still have some small communities that just don't have the bandwidth to be able to accommodate this kind of thing.
Right.
It's much better.
Well, so considering it was quite a feat to get it all going, how did your department demonstrate the value of e-learning to the CEO and to the people up in the company?
Well, that's an excellent question, and it's you have to do it with real metrics. Time saved. One of the biggest savings was when we did our orientation, because it used to require an individual to sit with another individual, usually a manager with one, maybe two employees, and go through an orientation and fill out all their paperwork and their onboarding process and get them acclimated to the restaurant, etc. And now they could do a big portion of that by themselves. They could learn, the company history and all of that. So it saved the managers an enormous amount of time. And you can add that up in terms of the number of managers and how much time it would take, number of hours a day, and that's a direct savings. So that was a huge help. The other part that helped us a great deal, Harold, was we use a lot of OJT and knowledge and information given to the employee before they can actually get into OJT.
Oh, Robert,
and usually
it was on the job training.
Oh, okay.
No, you cut out a little bit.
Yeah, your audio cut out just a bit, but on the
saying.
job training, yeah.
Yeah, on the job training. But before that could be effective, the student needed to have a certain amount of knowledge and information to even be able to operate equipment. And usually what we had been doing is another individual would buddy up with them and try to teach them all of that. But we can now orient them to each of the workstations in the restaurant, and there could be as many as 10 or 12 different positions when you figure out all your prep, and then you've got fryer stations and makeups tables and grill and the window and the front counter, all of those kinds of things. But there's a lot of information that can just be given to the employee that was given one-on-one before that they can learn online. And those are the kinds of things that we put online. The very last thing that we put online was the management training programs. Now, those were quite extensive, and they actually saved an enormous amount of time because we figured out how to teach them all their back office requirements without having to go to a classroom, which was great. Now, we still conducted some classroom training for advanced skills in doing analysis on food cost analysis and those kinds of things, and troubleshooting some of the maintenance things that had to be done in those stores. But we did a lot of that. Almost all of it was instructor-led at one time, and then we were able to push all of that online. And when we did, the savings for travel and rooms and all of that sort of thing just went down tremendously. So we were able to demonstrate several $1 million of savings, especially over a period of time. Then we implemented some other testing, initiatives that helped as well.
Now, I would say, just from what I've seen of fast food training, and I remember I worked right out of high school at Der Wiener Schnitzel for a short time. It wasn't very long, but I was there for a while. And a lot of it, like you said, was taught one-on-one. Somebody mentored you. Here's how you do this. Here's how you stand. Here's how you move. Here's where you go. If there's no customer, you stand here and do this, or you clean that. And it was, you learn pretty quickly. But, back then, nobody called it microlearning. And I'm thinking, microlearning is the big buzzword right now, but it's nothing new. If you look at the way a lot of fast food is taught, it is microlearning. They learn specific parts of what they need to do quickly. And it's in short segments, and here's how you put the fries in. Boom, that's a course, maybe. That's part of training. Here's how you do this. And so I'd say the food service industry as one is one of those that pioneered microlearning, if you will, because you had to teach a large number of people and a revolving workforce quickly. You didn't have hundreds of hours to teach them how to attend to customers, how to do everything they do. And yet it was very successful. So I'd say that was one of the first experiments or ways of doing microlearning. Today, back then, what do you think?
Yeah, I would agree with that completely. There was a lot of little snippets that could be done immediately, and you're right about where to stand and how to stand.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting, too, Rick, a lot of these people that come into the quick service industry may have never worked before at all, and they haven't learned some of the social skills.
Right.
You know, and I'm talking about very simple things like saying please and thank you, yes ma'am, no ma'am, and that sort of thing. It seems like a lot of that was when I was young. My parents and yours too probably beat that into our heads.
Yeah.
You said yes and please and no ma'am,
yep.
and yes ma'am, yes sir.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And we had to teach all of those kinds of things, and
yep.
so. And you can do that in person, but it's also, we found it was quite effective doing that online, because we actually were able to create some scenarios where the employee could listen to a scenario of an order being taken, and even if it was a problem order, and they could listen to someone experienced handle the problem order or the problem customer without escalating into a fist fight over, cold fries,
right.
or I didn't want mayo,
Yep.
I want mustard, those kinds of things. That's how simple those kinds of things are. But just being able to deal with those kinds of conversations was difficult for people who had never had to have that kind of conversation before. And those are micro-learning segments and snippets that are very easily done on a quick audio.
Yeah, and that's amazing. And that's why I always kind of laugh when I hear so many people talk about, well, micro-learning is the way to go. Well, yeah, but it's been done forever. It's not new. And frankly, your industry in particular, the military, same thing. Micro-learning was very key to how they taught people to use equipment, to use radios, to use communication devices, surgical things. Everything was done very quickly. The medics learned quickly how to become, if you will, EMTs or even paramedics, and what they did, because they're in a warlike situation many times. They don't have time to learn everything they have to do. They learn on the fly, and they have reference guides, they have everything. But there's industries like the food industry in particular, because you've got to deal with cleanliness issues. You've got to deal with no food poisoning. You've got to deal with dealing with the public and putting out something that the public likes. Now, everybody makes fun of fast food restaurants, but I don't know too many people who never go to a fast food restaurant. Well, and frankly, the food's pretty good. Well, I'm a fast food junkie, so I'm not gonna put down fast food.
And I mean, the thing about fast food is, compared to other kinds of restaurants, there's a much higher standard for consistency.
Mm-hmm.
Like consistency, not even just in the same country, even across locations in different countries. You have to have people coming in and eating the same thing and recognizing it. It's
they get their favorites, and if they don't get it tasting the way it's supposed to, I mean, there's big trouble.
And the funny thing is, no matter where you are in the world, if you go to McDonald's, tastes pretty much the same. The only difference is, in some places they'll add cuisine that's local to that community or environment. But other than that, it's pretty much the same taste. It's, like it or hate it, it's the same taste, meaning it's consistent. If you want your big breakfast, it's going to be the same here, there, and everywhere. And that makes a big difference. That makes travelers happy. That makes people who are all over the place happy. I know a lot of people used to be like the road warrior. It sounded like you were a road warrior for a while, going place to way. And you know what it's like. The Marriott chain was brilliant. They created the courtyards as a place where every courtyard was almost exactly the same as every other courtyard. When you got there, you didn't have to spend 45 minutes, like I've done sometimes, looking for a room, because the place is a maze. You knew exactly where you were. You knew how to get there. The rooms were all the same. You knew what the bed felt like. You knew everything. So for business travelers, you were relaxed.
Yes. That kind of standardization, too, is what facilitates e-learning. Because everybody does the same thing. You don't have to have 16 versions of the same of a different product or program. Or it's all the same. You mentioned Marriott. One of the best courses I ever saw on food safety was one that Marriott did, and it was an animated video, and there was no words. There were no words whatsoever. It was all done with animations. They had a fork, a knife, a spoon, a plate, a two-wheel dolly. They had all different kinds of characters, and they were all animated. And they did it with facial expressions and actions. And it was the reason that they did it with no language was because they had so many units or so many hotels in different countries. So to try to do that same program with all these different languages was just prohibitive. Because even though you say I know Japanese or I know Chinese or I know Spanish, the different dialects are almost impossible to try and meet everyone's needs in terms of the language. Yeah. Well, they did it without language. And it was absolutely brilliant. Great example. And we used that as a sample when we came up with a lot of our e-learning courses. And we tried to eliminate as much language as possible and do it with images. And that also is like a micro type of learning. Because job aids are micro learning incidents.
Yep.
Where you simply show how to clean a piece of equipment. Or how to, you see those kinds of things at the doctor's offices.
Yeah.
And now with COVID, how to put a mask on. There's language beneath it, but the pictures many times are self-explanatory.
Right.
How to wash your hands.
And I guess that brings up, we were talking before about how e-learning can really make training much more efficient and cost-effective. Not only is that efficient in terms of communicating things without having to tell people what, but that's also a big savings because you don't have to necessarily translate nearly as much language, into a dozen different languages. It's if a lot of the actual content is transmitted just visually without necessarily need for people to understand what's going on in a certain language, then that saves quite a bit.
Exactly. What we were trying to do, a lot of our training in, of course, English and Spanish, because we had a lot of Hispanic people who worked in the food service industry, especially in the Southeast, Atlanta, all the way down to Florida and other places. But we did some that were Spanish and English, but not very much on e-learning. It was a lot of print stuff that we did that had Spanish and English. The multiple languages make it very difficult. We did a lot of print. We did a whole dictionary on restaurant terms with Spanish and English translations. And I actually took a little booklet like that with me when I went to Spain, and it worked really well for ordering food.
That's good. Yeah. Now, taking this a step back, you're obviously, the training is part of the equation, but so is the talent, the people. How do and most fast food most fast food places tend to hire pretty friendly people, especially the ones who are customer facing. And what's the criteria for hiring in restaurants like that? So that they are service oriented, they have the manners, they have the smile. The smile is so important. What's the criteria for finding consistently individuals like that?
Well, of course, you look for people who have an outgoing personality. We actually had courses on how to recruit and hire, and we would teach them the kinds of characteristics that we wanted them to identify. Does the person smile? Do they know how to express themselves clearly? And so we had to teach our managers how to select for those traits. It was very difficult, and we would have videos that we did of people who just had it. Some people are just very, very friendly. We had one fellow that would just come in singing all the time. Now, he was a joyful individual. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of people like that. There was a girl down in Corpus Christi, Texas, which was at the time the headquarters for Whataburger, and she was just so bubbly that the only place she wanted to work was at the drive-through window. What a perfect deal. We taught our managers how to select for those kinds of skills. And it was great. And then when we found somebody who was really good at it and was just natural, because sometimes you just don't teach that stuff. It just comes with their personality. When we found somebody, we'd video that. And we would get it out to the field so that they knew what to look for. And it's a very common practice throughout the restaurant industry is to find the people. And then what one of my bosses used to say was, there are people and there are pickle people who always look like they've been the pickle people who always look like they've just eaten a sour dill pickle and they got this grumpy face.
Mm-hmm.
So we find something that they can do, but it's usually not customer facing.
Now, how do you deal with a fairly rude public sometimes? Because that is also one of the issues. That's a training issue. How do you get people? Because I remember I didn't have the most patience for rude people. It's like, no, you're not going to get away with that. And it's like, I didn't work fast food that much, but just in other jobs I've had, I never had a lot of patience for rude jerks. And there's enough of them out there. And I would just go, no, you're not going to pull that. You're going to be. I worked in supermarkets for a while. That was even worse. Yeah. You're dealing with just some really insanely nutty people, and my personality probably wasn't the best for that because I like nice people. I don't care for people who are rude, and I guess I'm big enough to tell them, hey, don't be rude. And we've had our share. And of course, the manager say, you can't say that to people. I go, well, you know what? They can abuse us. I don't think that's right either. But how do you deal with that part of the training? Because you're in a small store. Many times there's only maybe 2 or 3 people even working at a certain shift. Or how do you deal with some of the problems as a training issue?
Oh, absolutely. The dealing with difficult customers. There have been videos produced on that. We had courses on that, and we would create scenarios where somebody's order was wrong and they kept getting it wrong. And how do you deal with that? How do you de-escalate? And at some point, you may have to call for a manager, and we would try to teach them when you call for a manager. But it was interesting, Rick, that you bring that up. We literally had to teach people what being polite meant. How do you be polite?
Right.
And it's unfortunate, but a lot of that stuff just doesn't seem to be being taught. I think they're starting to do more of that now in grade schools and all. But it's funny. But like I was mentioning before, we had that beat into our heads by our parents. But doing the scenarios and animating that is a great way to do it because it speaks volumes. And one of the other methods that is really good is using cartoon characters. I read a study, it's been some time ago now, that the one universal communication media is cartoons and cartoon characters. It seems to cross all racial and ethnic lines around the world. There's cartoon characters everywhere. The sense of humor is in the human spirit, and so you try to show that. If you can do that now, animations on video and stuff can be quite expensive. It's less now than it used to be, but you can still do it. And with it, when you're talking about customer service, that's really important. I've done a number of courses as a voiceover professional for customer service programs for homeowners association management companies and grocery store chains and convenience stores. Lots and lots of courses like that, and they all use something very similar. They say, listen to Joe handling a customer who's upset about a fence, and so you play that whole thing and you demonstrate what the customer is upset about and how Joe or whoever it might be, Sally, would handle that customer and the exact language that they use. So you can do some very realistic role-playing types of things that are pretty effective. You also asked about selecting for customer service orientation. One of the things that was really effective that we did at the Crystal Company when they were based in Chattanooga was we used an assessment that the prospective employee could come in and take this assessment online, and it was very accurate in being able to tell who was more likely to be able to utilize good judgment in dealing with customers and who wasn't. And it was incredibly accurate, and so we had great success with that.
That's great. Yeah. And you are right. The manners thing is something that isn't quite taught nowadays a lot. I see it all the time. And I used to teach martial arts a lot, and we had kids come in, and it's like, you don't just walk in. First of all, you communicate. Second, you have manners. You don't say, you say please, thank you, sir, yes, ma'am. And they all got with it, but some of them took a little longer and some of them got kicked out. It was that simple. Yeah. because you didn't want to spend your whole lifetime trying to train someone who should have already been trained. Parents didn't do their job, and I can't even say that. I know parents who did do their job and the kid didn't learn. There's that issue too. But in fast food, usually people are pretty friendly. And one thing I always tell people, because you always hear this, whether it's fast food or a sit down restaurant where there's tips, a lot of tips are given and things like that. People go, well, I didn't like the waitress, I'm not leaving a good tip. And I always say, you know what, leave a tip anyway. Leave a good tip.
Yes.
You know what, you don't know what kind of jerk a-hole was there before you. And, people are people. You got to give them some slack. And maybe that will cheer them up and they'll get back to being normal. Now, if they're that way all the time, okay, forget about it. Ask for a different waitress or waiter or whatever. They probably won't last. But, it's that kind of human-to-human consideration, and don't immediately throw somebody out the door. Just, when you deal with the public, it's not easy. We did a thing for the County of Los Angeles years ago. This is probably about 12 years ago. It was a thing we wrote called SMILE. Service means involvement, listening, and empathy. And it was teaching. First, it went to only healthcare professionals. It went to the public health system because they had horrible reviews. They had people who hated the public health system. There were long lines. There were this, that. And then we started interviewing the people in the system, and there were just beacons of light within the system. There was one lady, she was kind of a manager at one of the public health places where there were long lines every morning to get in. So what she would do is she would go and walk the line and ask people, would you mind if I move this older person up the line in front of you because they're very old? Oh, no, that's okay. Nobody complained. She goes, I would give out candy, I would give out snacks, I would talk to people. And she goes, that made all the difference in the world. And I remember the video we did, she totally impromptu. She goes, I am customer service. I define it. That's my job. And I was going, wow, we couldn't have written that for her. She just said it, and she believed it. And it was that caring, that natural caring. And then we said, how do you transfer you to 10 other people who maybe don't? And so I did a train the trainer for about, I think it was about 100 people by the time we were done, maybe 125. They had to train 110,000 people. It started out with 35,000 people in public health, and that went to the whole county afterwards because their complaints were horrible. And you know what? Yeah. It dropped to almost nothing.
Yeah.
It's just making people aware. It's the awareness of behaviors. And I would always do it by example. What do you guys hate most to the trainers? Oh, I hate going to the DMV. That's very good. Do you know that you are considered equally as bad? Oh, yes. That, the eyes opened up. And for public workers, this is one of the things that they really were surprised at. Where do you make your revenue? I don't know. They didn't know. They were never taught that they collected revenue. They didn't make it. I go, that's a big difference. You're collecting from taxpayers. The taxpayers feel you owe them something.
And it's true. They do.
And I go, that doesn't mean, they can be a jerk about it, but it's, you need to understand where you're coming from and where they're coming from. If they're waiting for hours in line for something that could have been done in 10 minutes, but nobody cares, then you have an issue. And those people feel their taxes aren't being paid for. Or, they're not good. It's a bad result. But again, if you make people aware, and that's what I'm sure they do in food services in particular, of how they behave, how the people react to them, then that probably helps them perform better as they talk to people and as they service people. Because again, people forget what service means. So I have to be nice to people. I have to serve people. Like flight attendants. A lot of people think they're just waitresses, and they treat them as just waitresses. These people are pretty highly trained in a lot of things, including emergency procedures. I was on one flight once. It was on a Delta flight years ago, where as we're taxiing towards the runway, we hear a and I look out. I was on the left wing, and I look out towards the right wing, and there's a lot of smoke billowing off the wing. It's like, well, that's not good. And we're fully loaded with fuel. And one guy, he was like 6'4", gets up and goes, "We're on fire." And this little 5'3" maybe flight attendant goes, "Sit down." The guy goes, just sat down. "Everybody stay down, relax, nothing's going on, wait." And that little person had everybody totally controlled. They forgot about the fire. They were just listening to her, scared of her. But she was excellent. She was very nice, but when it came down to the emergency, boy, did she change. And she knew how to control people with her voice and with her actions. That 6-foot-something guy was down in his chair like a little kid. And you know what it was? It was the APU, the auxiliary power unit, had short-circuited. But we had fire trucks behind us following us, and we went, "Oh, great!" They pulled us back. It was a 727, an older 727. They serviced. Only 2 guys got off the plane. 2 business guys just ran off the plane when we pulled back to the gate. We all stayed on. They fixed it. We got back on. We took off, and one of the best flights I'd ever been on. It was very smooth, but it is interesting, the training and how they reacted to a situation. I've seen this in fast food where I've seen near fights break out in a fast food restaurant, and a manager very calmly controlled it.
As some conflict resolution.
Yes.
Listening to you talk about that, and it's something that I would call the collective social responsibility to contribute to the personality of the social structure.
Yeah, it is.
What that simply means is that we're all responsible for the social personality of the collective. If it's your city, if it's LA, if it's Dallas, if it's Georgetown, Texas, where I am, the way we treat one another on daily transactions is what makes a collective personality of the community. And,
if you go to the South, and you're from Texas, but if you go to the South, anywhere in the South, pretty much, when you arrive, you see, even in the South still, you see very good manners. People are very friendly, and it's across all races, creeds, whatever. People are friendly. They're naturally just, you get a smile, you get politeness, and it's like, wow, I love that. I mean, we live near LA. LA's a cold city. It never has been a warm city. It's one of those, a lot of people feel very lonely in LA, and it's sort of interesting because you have 10 million people in LA proper, and they're lonely. It's not, it's a cold city. It's not a friendly city. Other cities are very friendly. I've been to places in the South, even Atlanta, which is a bigger city, is still very friendly. Now you see vestiges of other kind of cities, but it's still not. It's still pretty nice.
Well, that social responsibility and personality. If you look at a restaurant, each office has its own personality.
Yes,
it's based on the people in that unit, how they treat one another, and of course that's a big management responsibility. But the social atmosphere in any given quarters, whether it's a corporate headquarters or even a floor within a corporate headquarters, each floor, each group will have its own personality. And that works together to make the whole corporate personality. We'll make the corporate as big as you want to. I mean, the world has a personality when you get that big. But that's each one of us contributes to that. And like you mentioned about giving the server a tip, even though the service may not have been all that great. Well, if you decide you're going to treat that person with some dignity and respect, and see if maybe that will convert them or make their day a little cheerier, that will carry on. And so, let's say if the manager comes in a bad mood, guess who else is going to have a bad mood?
Everybody.
Everybody.
In the military, now I wasn't never actually literally in the military, but I've been involved with some things. And in the military, when the general wakes up, PO'd at everybody, the private is wiping it off his head.
Yeah, exactly.
It filters down very quickly, and that's not good for morale or anything else. But there was a book, I've talked about this on a couple of other shows in the past. It was called The Best Damn Ship in the Navy. And it was about a captain, a young captain, new. And they gave him one of the worst ships they had. I can't remember the name of the ship right now, but I think it was in the 7th Fleet, which is the one that takes care of Asia and from pretty much the West Coast all the way to Asia. And he gets on this thing, and Navy management was very stodgy, very old-fashioned, very British in the way they handled it.
Yes.
the officers did not talk to the enlisted men at all. They were just given orders to. And I was a honorary Navy officer, so I know a little bit about that, as I got in trouble for being friendly to people. And I went, oh, geez, these are kids. I mean, we were running a kid program for the Navy, and they were like, don't touch that. Don't treat those people like equals. We didn't treat them like equals, but we treated them nicely. We didn't treat them badly. You still gave them orders, but you didn't treat them like jerks. But anyway, so in this book, The Best Damn Ship in the Navy, it was a book on leadership, an excellent book, only about 100-something pages. He joined, he got into his ship, and the ship had drug addiction problems, violence problems, racism, you name it, that ship had problems.
Yeah.
So he said, I want to see every seaman and officer in my office for 15 minutes starting now. So they scheduled out the next 3 days. He met with everybody. One person said, my wife's having a baby tomorrow, and the other CO wouldn't let us, the commanding officer wouldn't let me go home to see the baby. And he goes, is that so? He had an helicopter airlift him home to go see the baby. Well, that brought 50 other people as part. I think there was like 100-something people on the crew. That gained respect from a lot of people. Then he talked to every one of them, got to know them all by name. It wasn't just, Seaman, get over here. It was like, no. It was like, Kowalski, come here. and I'm Kowalski, and I have a name. And he treated everybody with respect. And they all treated themselves with respect. And before you knew it, everybody wanted to be on that ship. They all were asking to get transferred to that ship. All because he treated them as humans, as people. And I know the admirals really were not happy with him. He didn't care. He says, I'm running this ship the way I see fit.
Yeah, those skills and being able to treat people are incredibly powerful. And to treat them with dignity and respect. I mean, if you want to turn around the attitude of any kind of an organization, implement something like that. I have a friend now who's doing some training on kindness. It's a big deal, and he's one of his big clients is Chick-fil-A.
Okay,
and they're just really trying to teach people how to be kind to one another. Now, some people would look at that and go, "Yeah, all right, we got a job to do here. Let's get this done and get money in the cash register." Well, if you want to get that money in the cash register and have people coming back, you better learn how to treat people with dignity and respect.
Yeah,
you'll have bricks coming through your windows and stuff like that. It's just it's really that simple.
Well, it's interesting because also restaurants on the whole, whether it's a small one or a large one, the kitchens are controlled chaos.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Especially when it's busy.
Whether it's 5-star or just the first guy on the block down the road,
And the kitchens have to work well with each other. And you'll hear in big kitchens screaming and this and that, but it's not screaming at each other. It's just screaming, plate's ready, this is ready, I need this here, boom, boom. And the waitresses or waiters know how to get things out of the cooks when the cooks are stressed. And
that's one of the things that we really did a lot of work on at TGI Fridays.
Yes.
The kitchen crews and the waiters and waitresses how to make requests of the kitchen or the makeup area or whatever it may be, or within themselves, because there's a lot of noise in those kitchens. But there was always please and thank yous.
Yes,
that's
great.
Over here on whatever, thank you, please,
that's great,
etc.
Yeah.
Maybe yelling, but still, it's only yelling because you have to get over the din of the ambient noise in the building.
Well, and I think your point about kindness is a good one, because especially in an industry like the restaurant industry, then when customers are displeased and they don't want to come back anymore, they don't necessarily go and fill out a form saying their complaint. They just don't come back, and you don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And they talk to other people about it.
Yeah.
And other people listen. They listen to each other. It's like buying a new car. I bought a new car just recently, and all of my friends would ask, well, how was it? Do you like the car? Did you like the place? And they will ask for references.
Yes.
And if it's not good, you're going to tell them. And it makes a big difference on where you go and how often you go there.
Well, I'll give you an idea. For example, we've been driving Lexus cars for quite a while out here. It's a cheap, I call it cheap, not that cheap, but as a luxury car goes compared to a Mercedes or Audi, they're a lot cheaper. But the service and the way they treat you is pretty nice. I went to a BMW dealership once, and they just ignored me for like an hour. I finally left. I go, geez, nobody even came to ask me if I had a question. I asked some guys who were watching a football game, excuse me, can I ask you something? Oh, we'll get right to you. And that's a high-end dealership. And I was looking at an 80 grand car, and I went, and I think I want a BMW. So I left. I just figured, this is how you're going to treat us, forget it. But that's service again. It's how you get treated, how people are nice or not nice. And people remember things like that. And that's the kind of thing nobody will forget. When we hire people or work with people, we try to look for people who like to help, like Harold. Mm-hmm. Harold, when I met Harold, one of the things he said on the interview is, I like helping people.
Yeah.
You know what? That to me is the kind of person you want as a human being. And
I think I actually helped you get a laptop lock open during the interview.
You might have.
Yeah.
That was a test, Harold. You passed it, apparently.
Yep. Yeah. And I have bad eyes, and every so often I don't see well on screens with little teeny fonts and no contrast. And as I bring something up, Harold's right behind me. Can I help you? Oh, sure. Like Radar. Remember Radar? Was it Radar O'Reilly from MASH? Yeah, that's Harold. Yeah. He's very good at that. But that's a skill and art and just the internal goodness of a person. And those are things that, a lot of people think if I'm a jerk, I'll get moved ahead. And it doesn't really work that way unless you're in a really lousy business. In most businesses, good people get moved ahead, and people who care about other people and are responsible.
Yeah, and I think this again goes into what I was saying, where
IQ.
Yeah,
there's that.
The IQ and the EQ. Yep.
EQ and the social IQ.
Yep.
There's the effect where if you're a jerk to people, then people don't necessarily tell you that you're being a jerk, and they don't want to work with you anymore. They might just avoid you, and you don't know it. So this way, like people might not get it. They're not treating people right, so that's why they're not getting what they need to. But this happens.
There's the music.
That was the rude music coming on loudly, but jeez. That was my fault. I have a music controller right here, and I pressed the button a little too hard. Anyway, well, Robert, this is great seeing you again and having a good conversation with things that are really important today. I don't care how much computers matter. People matter more. So, let's never forget that and keep that in mind. And I think your experience and what you've shared today is just really valuable. Very good stuff. And I sure hope those numbers are right for this industry, because to us it's been slow, and other people are going, they're slow. I know a lot of companies in e-learning who are slow the last year and this year, and yet all the numbers say it's going great. We're going, where? So, whatever. Oh, and by the way, before we leave, even though Robert has retired from working the grind of every day, probably works more than ever now doing other things, including voiceover. So if you have any voiceover needs, Robert is available. He does a really good job, and he's been doing it for a lot of years. So,
and we have his LinkedIn in the video description if you want to, meet up with Robert and talk to him.
Yep. So, Robert, thanks for coming on again. We hope to have you on again soon. And for all you folks watching, we'll put Robert's information down, his LinkedIn information. You can get a hold of him there. And we'll see you all next week on eLearnChat. Have a good one, everyone. Bye-bye. Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.